This is gonna be a long one, and in my opinion, it's a very important topic to discuss because the outrage mobs are getting stronger, and I want you to also be stronger and smarter. Before we get to this video, YouTube will demonetize it because I'm talking about the outrage mob, so if you'd like to support my work, you can do so by checking the links down below. Also, huge thanks to Jessica, Naoto, and Zelgadis for the donations and pledges. You guys are fantastic. Social media has a really mixed bag result for people. It's a place where you might be able to find your friends or even loved ones, but at the same time, it's a place where you know that stupid, deranged, and delusional people exist. As people use social media more often, they're gonna share whatever thoughts that they have. But what some people don't realize is that sharing your takes on a public space is going to prompt criticisms from people through many means. Oh sure, they're going to prompt likes and retweets and all that jazz, but there are also times where people will respond to you. People can respond with your takes in many different ways. They can either agree or disagree with your take in a polite and respectful manner or an annoying and inflammatory manner. That's just the nature of social media, and whether or not your takes on the internet will be received well or poorly depends on many factors actually. It might be possible that you're the one who starts off the take with an inflammatory tone and people responded back with an equally inflammatory tone. It might be that you're very polite and the take is harmless, but people still responded back with contempt. Social media is unpredictable that way, and whatever discourse happening inside it is always covered by people's tendency to spiral it out of control. Whatever valid points that people have and valid critiques that people deliver will be covered by those who call people names and insult them with colorful language, and when all the hurlings happen, the conversation becomes incredibly toxic, to the point where people might resort to blocking the accounts of the conflicting party or protecting themselves from any takes in social media. This happens way too often on social media, as I documented many times on my streams, and I need to remind you that I do my streams weekly, Friday 6 p.m. Eastern Time, and in every stream, I document all the hot takes that I found on social media. I can tell you for sure that it's happening every week, almost every day even. Any sorts of discussions about topics that people might find important will be lost like tears in the rain, tears made by the easily offended. You can choose whatever topics you like on social media, and when there are two opposing sides to the debate, depending on how persistent they are in their beliefs, they will never ever be a point where they reach a reasonable middle ground. But the most ironic part about social media conversations, especially when we're dealing with people sharing their hot takes on Twitter, is that these people are very brave on sharing their opinions, but if any of these takes get a lot of clout, they tend to run away from many sorts of criticisms by either muting the thread or blocking people who confronted them. They're so brave to share their thoughts out in the open, but when those ideas are being challenged, they run away instead of trying to understand why those ideas are contemptuous to people's eyes. Now, I'm not gonna discuss specific takes, I'll leave that to my weekly streams in case you want to see me dunking on the specific bad takes, but I do want to focus on one example that happens very often on Twitter. Take for example, the people who criticize fan service in anime. They're gonna say that fan service in anime is very demeaning to women and that anime creators should be more responsible in their portrayals. The problem is that these people tend to criticize fan service in animes that are made for young men, as in shonen animes, as in animes where pleasing the young boys is the primary focus. Young boys, especially in Japan, are unfortunately a bunch of perverts, which is why pleasing them through fan service is going to be expected. So coming into an anime designed for boys and criticizing the portrayal of female characters because they have fan service moments in it is like coming to an anime designed for girls and criticizing the portrayal of male characters because they have fan service moments. You're criticizing an anime for what they're doing for their target audience. What are you going to criticize next? That waters will quench first? And we're not even going to the discussion that shonen animes already have wonderful and strong female characters. It's just that some people in social media tend to nitpick their fan service nature and how it's pleasing to the men and exaggerate the critique into something that shouldn't have been a big deal. But as these criticisms tend to go, It depends. Maybe the anime does have fan service moments that really interrupt the flow of the story and treats the female characters as nothing but objects to be ogled with. I've seen animes or even games that do that. Our World Is Ended in particular is a very strong offender, and when that does happen, maybe there is a valid point to the criticism. If you want to talk about fan service in anime, I'd recommend you to be specific. I watch a lot of animes, and each of them do fan service differently, some of which are good, some of which are bad. It's the same thing as when we're discussing subs or dubs. It depends. But even if your criticisms have some merit to it, when you share these thoughts on social media, people are going to respond to it. People are going to criticize it. And the reason is because not all criticisms are perfect. All sorts of takes on a public space like social media will be held into scrutiny. If people can't accept that, then maybe they shouldn't be there in the first place. People in social media share their thoughts and present them as if they're the correct opinion that everyone should follow. Even worse, some people in social media will share their thoughts and present them as if they're the morally correct opinion that everyone should follow. And if you don't follow their moral opinions, well, you must be a horrible person. You must be a person who hates people for their identities. You must hate X person. How dare you? When you share a take on the internet and you decided that your take is a moral one that people should be obligated to follow, that's when you turn from some rando on social media into a moral guardian. Now, I do realize that I've made some really bad takes throughout my presence in social media, but whatever the bad takes that I made, whatever disagreements that you have with me, you're not a horrible person for disagreeing with me. People disagree. That happens all the time, and the sooner people realize it, the better. In my opinion, a really great metric to judge people's characters is how they deal with opinions that are different to them. Are you going to deal with them in a polite and respectful manner, or are you going to screech at them? As usual, it depends from person to person. Some people might be more tolerant, some people might be more intolerant, and unfortunately, in social media, we're more often than not dealing with people who are intolerant. This can cause a huge problem, especially when their criticisms contribute negatively to the source material, like how animes for young boys shouldn't appeal to young boys because some women are not happy with some of the female characters. I'm wondering why these people air these really dumb critiques to these shows. Is it because they're popular? Is it because the girl-centric animes are not as popular as the boy-centric ones? These criticisms are not helpful. In fact, they are very harmful to the medium. Let me illustrate to you how. Imagine yourself being a content creator, whether it be video games, animes, or even just artworks on the internet. Imagine yourself making something harmless that most people enjoy, but then your creations become the target of criticism by some moral guardians. Maybe the character that you drew is underage, and you're drawing a lewd version of her when she's an adult or something. Maybe the character that you drew has a slightly lighter skin than her original design. Maybe the women characters are nothing but fan service materials and offer no good character development. But unfortunately, you're not too well versed on the internet outrage machine. So when someone share your art for the purpose of morally criticizing it with whatever moral justifications that they have, and it got tons and tons of retweets and likes and clout, you're gonna be swayed by them. You're gonna look at the number of likes that they have and think, wow, maybe this person is representing the majority opinions. Maybe the opinions of the majority is that they don't like this art because it's morally contemptuous and horrendous. And of course, since you don't want to be looked at as a horrible person, you're going to apologize to the outrage mob and take down your work. You're gonna follow all the moral suggestions from these people and submit into their outrage. Unfortunately, thanks to the nature of social media being biased towards the seemingly moral side of the argument, a lot of these takes are not representative of the majority. They just appear to be representative of the majority thanks to arbitrary social media metrics. The majority of people usually don't care about the outrage. All that they care about is whether or not your work is good. And even if they're aware of the outrage mob, they don't want to contribute into the drama. Maybe because they don't like the drama and they want to stay away from them as far as possible, which is perfectly understandable. But the thing is, I need you to be aware that these moral critiques are still being made in social media as we speak. They're still gaining a lot of clout, and they have the power to discourage people from making the works that they want to make. They have the power to change your favorite fictional content into something that they are not. This isn't really a problem in the Japanese entertainment media, mostly because Japanese people just don't really care about the Western outrage. But there are some who do care. There are those who are unaware about how the moralizing outrage mob works, and they will submit into the outrage when there are way too much pressure being put into them, and thus you're gonna have works that submit into that pressure, whether it be video games, animes, or artworks in general. It is, however, a big problem with the Western entertainment media. They are the ones who are easily swayed by the outrage mob, especially when the political discourse is getting more and more toxic as time went on. But at the same time, since the outrage mob is more prominent here, there are also those who are aware of it and will not submit into the mob. When these people are getting more and more spotlight, there will be more and more detractors who will talk against them and criticize them. These moral critiques are not free from criticism. They should also be held accountable. In fact, all criticisms should be held accountable. All forms of critiques should be open to criticism as well, including and especially the moral ones, the ones that insinuate that you're a horrible person if you do not submit to them, the ones that insinuate that you're discriminating against X people or you have a hatred against X people. But here's a big problem. Even though you have criticized these takes, the developers are only going to notice the outrage mob because you didn't get as much clout as them. So what do? Well, here's a solution for me. Think of the social media as a courtroom. You are on the side of the defendant. You are playing the role of a lawyer, trying to defend whatever works that are under the threats of being changed by the outrage mob. In this case, the prosecutors. The prosecutors will bring whatever moral arguments that they have towards the judges and the juries. In this case, the developers or the artists of the work as a judge, and the people who are not aware of this drama in general as the jury. The developers will be the ones who will dictate the fate of the works that you love, which is why they're the judge in this analogy. Except in a court, a real one, not as depicted in Phoenix Wright, the defendants and the prosecutors don't usually talk to each other directly. In social media, well, that's bound to happen. In fact, you are most likely going to encounter the two sides bickering and fighting each other. Unfortunately, what I'm seeing more often than not in social media is the defendants spending their time criticizing or mocking the prosecutors, then actually talking to the judges, presenting their arguments and telling them whatever that guy said is BS or something. And yes, I am guilty on this too. And I can't help it. Mocking the outrage mob can be very fun. But if we're talking about making a significant change in the industry, I think we should spend less time mocking the mob and more time talking to the artists or the creators. Think about this for a second. Considering that the outrage mob will most often run away or block people when their criticisms are being held accountable, I'd say that there's absolutely no use in arguing with them, other than it can be fun sometimes. But the judges and juries won't be convinced by our mockery. These judges and juries are waiting for you, the defendant, to present your arguments to them and convince them that these works are not guilty of any of the prosecutor's claims, whether it be that the works are discriminatory to X people or perpetuating a harmful stereotype, etc. To put it simply, talk to the creators directly. Talk to the game developers or artists or whoever that got put as a target by the outrage mob and articulate your arguments to them and why you shouldn't consider the outrage mob's case as valid. You are here as a lawyer defending your favorite fictional media from being prosecuted and butchered by the developers thanks to the influence of the outrage mob. You are here to tell them, show them, and articulate your arguments in why the prosecutor is wrong, why the outrage mob is wrong, and why your fictional works are not guilty of anything. And because of that, you need to be polite, not towards the outrage mobs, but towards the developers. You need to treat these people who make these works with respect, especially the Japanese game developers who know nothing about the outrage mob. Sometimes I see you, the defendant, just went to the developers and bluntly say, I will not buy your game if you comply to X's demands. That's a threat. That's not very friendly and respectful. Instead, you should present your case in why the outrage mob is wrong and show them how it's detrimental and harmful. But unfortunately, I am aware that not a lot of people in social media will act the way I suggest them to act. It's a free world and you're allowed to act however you want, but there are circumstances and situations where you have to restrict yourselves. There are times where you're not allowed to be a D-bag. When you talk to the developers of your favorite entertainment medium, one that you're very passionate about, it's not helpful to be inflammatory. But even on that, it depends. What if you're the one who is on the prosecution side? You too might be part of the outrage mob towards a developer or publisher for certain things that they did. These developers and publishers are human after all. They can make mistakes, and when they do, we have to call them out as well. There are times where the game developer or publisher are doing something so egregious that it's pretty much open season for criticism, such as loot boxes or surprise mechanics or whatever predatory business practices that they do in games. There are times where you just can't help but to be inflammatory because what the game devs or publishers did are monstrous and harmful for the industry. Whatever side you are on, you need to talk to the creators directly. The outrage mobs are free to air their opinions to the creators, but we are also free to air ours, and we have to be more active in airing our opinions to them. More often than not, it's always the prosecution side that will talk directly to the developers. If you're going to be on the defensive, if you're going to tell these judges that these games are not guilty of whatever the prosecutors accuse them of being, then you should also speak directly to the developers and show them your arguments. To conclude this observation that I have, I'd like to remind people that the outrage mob will never change. They will always, and I mean always, make moral arguments out of anything, and they see anything and everything in current year that is very popular. While it is fun to mock the outrage mob, if you're trying to defend your favorite fictional content from the things that are threatening to destroy them, you have to directly speak to the creators. You have to tell them, show them, and articulate your defense. No matter how toxic popular social media can be, they're the ones with the most reach. I understand that social media can be toxic, but that's where the arguments are happening. That's where the fights are happening. If you dismiss them out of concerns of your own mental health, that's perfectly fine, and I respect your opinion, but if you want to truly defend your favorite fictional works from being butchered by the outrage mobs, you have to be there, because your favorite creators are still there, and they're reading all these bad takes. However, when they actually do screw up, don't be afraid to take the prosecutor's side. You're gonna most often find yourself in both sides of the argument, and the question is whether or not you want to fight for it. Say what you want about the moral guardians, they're very persistent, and if you're not as equally persistent, then well, you're gonna lose, man. And we don't want that to happen, do we?